Hi, you're listening to a student-focused episode of the Sociology Show podcast. If you're studying the subject at GCSE, A-level, foundation, degree, or any other discipline, then this podcast could be of help to you. If you have a question for the show, then you can email the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com, and one of the teachers, lecturers, examiners, or experts will answer your question for you. You can sponsor the show on the GoFundMe page and subscribe on all the usual podcast platforms. If you're going to class, going to the gym, or just chilling, put your headphones in and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to the Sociology Show podcast. This is a student special episode looking at an introduction to sociological theory. Before we get started on that, just a couple of things, a couple of messages. The first one is I'm going to be running a show all about your questions. I've had several questions that have come through to me already, particularly for those of you that are starting new courses at the moment. Maybe you're getting to grips with some new terminology and you're finding some things a bit difficult, or you've just got a general question about the subject at all. So if you would like to send me any questions at all, and it can be about anything sociological, as broad as you like, then please do email the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com. You can also send me messages on Twitter. If you haven't found me on Twitter, just look for the Sociology Show on Twitter, add me. You can always DM me on there if you want to, but if not, I'll give you that email address again. It's the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com. I also want to mention about online tutoring. I've had plenty of messages already, people that want some extra help, even if you just want one session, two sessions, a bulk of sessions. If there's anything that you would like in terms of extra help, and you can be at any level, whether you're doing your GCSE at A-level. I've had quite a few people who are starting their A2 year, realising it's quite a big jump up, and those exams are looming next summer, but you know that will come round quick. So if you do want any extra help at all, then please do get in touch. And if you would like to team up with a friend, you do not have to do it online on your own. If you would like to get a bunch of you together, even a class together, then you can contact me and see if we can arrange something in relation to that. So same again, if you would like any private tutoring, if you'd like any online tutoring, then please do email the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com. And so on to this episode then. Many of you will be starting courses and starting to look at theory. So after the first few weeks, when you've done some nice bits, probably about feral children and socialization and what are norms, what are values and so on, you start to move into the more difficult part of sociological theory. So the idea of this podcast is just to give you a brief introduction as to what theory actually is, look at some of the main components, and then also this is also to send you in the direction of other podcasts that have been made already that are really going to help you out in those first few weeks. So let's start from the beginning. What is sociological theory? So a sociological theory is a set of ideas that provides an explanation for human society, or it might be an explanation of institutions in society, or it could be highlighting an inequality in society. So the best way to think about it is a bit like political parties. So obviously in the US, we have the Republicans and we have the Democrats. And then in the UK, we have the Labour Party, Conservative Party, Lib Dems, and the Green Party. Now, each of these parties have a different view on how society works. And more importantly, they have a different view on the changes they believe need to be made to make a more effective society. And so this is really similar to sociological theories. Each group has different fundamental beliefs, and you are most likely to study in your class functionalism, Marxism, feminism, social interactionism, and postmodernism. You may also look at political links in the form of Social Democrat and the New Right. But if you think about all of those groups in the same way as you would political parties, they each have different fundamental beliefs, particularly about what is going right, and more importantly, what is going wrong in society, but also the resolutions to try and make a better, more functional and effective society as a whole. These sociological theories can be grouped together in various different ways, but we're going to start with the most important of these, and that's the difference between what we call structural theory and social action theory. As a starting point then, structural theorists are the probably older theories, so the first ones that you'll probably cover. And functionalism, Marxism, and feminism would fall under what we call the branch of structuralist theories. Now, the first thing to remember is those three different groups disagree on loads of different factors. So the fact that they're all structurists doesn't mean that they agree on everything. In fact, they disagree on most things. What do we mean by structuralism? Well, basically what we mean is they believe that society structures and influences us. So if you just think of this as a little question for yourself, do we control society or does society control us? So if you just imagine a person, okay, and a person has got their own unique independent abilities and personality and so on, there are two things that are affecting that individual. So pushing down on them from above is society telling them what to do, how to behave, who to be, how to be if you're a man, how to be if you're a woman, what it means to be rich, what it means to be poor. So anything that agrees with this idea of society pushing down on you is the structural approach. And pushing up from the bottom is your own individuality. You do not have to follow those rules. You can be quite unique. You have your own freedom. You have your own free will. And so you also got fighting against this idea of society shaping you, that we shape society. And that sort of angle is the more social action theory. So just thinking from the structural point of view, then I'll just recap that. A structural theorist is someone who believes that society has a big influence on us. In other words, we are directed and formed by the societies around us, that our environment has a heavy influence on us, on how we behave, how we interact, and quite often what our views and opinions actually are as well. A very simple idea is if you look at people's different religious beliefs, if you live in certain parts of the world, you are much more likely to be Christian. If you live in other parts of the world, you're much more likely to be Muslim. And other parts of the world, you're much more likely to be a Buddhist or a Hindu. And that is because of the influence of the society in which you grow up in. So if you've grown up in a family where your parents are Muslim and quite strong Muslim, and the rest of your society is your extended family and everyone around you, the chances are you are going to be Muslim yourself, because you are informed and shaped and structured by the society around you. Okay, so structuralist theorists believe that society has a heavy influence on us and shapes us. Now, because they're very interested in how society shapes us, they look at large forms or groups of people to try and understand behavior, often known as macro theorists. Okay, so they want to look at large behaviors, want to try and understand large groups of people and why they behave in the manner in which they do. So I would say early sociology very much took this structuralist approach. Functionalism is probably the first theory that you're going to look at, and they definitely take this structuralist approach to sociology. So your first kind of point of direction where I'd send you in is there is a podcast called An Introduction to Functionalism. It's about half an hour long. And so that would be a really good one to start with. Go back, have a listen to it, just Google it. You can find it, type in the Sociology Show, An Introduction to Functionalism, and you'll find it there. Another key word that you can do in relation to functionalists is this word consensus. They are consensus theorists, and what that means is they tend to look at what goes right in society. As the word suggests, they look at how society functions, how it all works together. And so they tend to try and look at what makes a society keep going, to be effective, to keep functioning in this form of consensus. The next group that you want to look at is your Marxists. You might know a little bit about Marxism already, but again, they are structuralists because they think society shapes us. In particular, they are looking at how money and the economy shapes us. And once again, you can listen to a podcast on this. Again, search for it, An Introduction to Marxism, the Sociology Show. Type it into Google, you'll find it. And again, that's about half an hour long, a good introduction to what Marxism actually is, and the same for feminism. And there's an Introduction to Feminism podcast, which you can listen to, but they are also structuralist theorists because they think that we are heavily shaped by society in terms of how we should behave, whether we are man or woman, the expectations we have of masculinity and femininity, and this idea that patriarchy pushes down on us and tells us how to behave. In other words, they believe that society heavily shapes our gendered actions and behaviors. So there you go. That's a little bit on structuralism. Now, another key word you can link here is your Marxist and feminist groups are conflict theorists. So just think what we said about consensus and turn it around. So functionalists tend to look at what goes right in society. Okay, so what works together, how society is effective. Marxists and feminists are a little bit more pessimistic. They're a little bit more negative. They look at what goes wrong in society and where there's a divide. So very simply, Marxists look at the divide between what they call the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. In other words, the rich and the poor. or the owners of production versus the workers of production. So they look how a big divide between two groups of people, and the divide between economic wealth has a massive impact on us. So therefore they are conflict theorists. And obviously feminists look at the divide between men and women and how we are treated differently, and when there's unequal amounts of power between the two sexes as well. So they are definitely a conflict theorist as well. So the majority of sociologists did take the structuralist theory. Then a very important writer, Max Weber, and it's pronounced Weber, it's spelled Weber, but it's pronounced Weber because he's of German extraction. He suggested that we need to take a different way of looking at human behavior. If we just start to study people as whole groups, we kind of miss the nuances, the individual behaviors, because no two people are the same. We can't say that all British people are alike, all US people are alike, all women are alike, all Muslims are alike, all Jewish people are alike. That would just be far too stereotypical. So for Weber, what he said is, to truly understand human behavior, we need to look at individuals and individual behavior. And from this, we start to see the birth of social action theory. And this developed into what we call symbolic interactionism, sometimes just referred to as interactionism. But this is a branch of sociology that is a lot more small scale. So remember, we said structurists take a macro approach. Your social action theorists take a much more micro approach to sociology. So they're much more likely to do really small scale research, perhaps doing in-depth interviews or doing observations on individuals or very small groups of people, because they firmly believe the true way to understand human behavior is just to look at the individuals. So again, what I'm going to point you in the direction of is another one of my podcasts. It's called An Introduction to Social Action Theory. Actually, I think it's called An Introduction to Interactionism or Symbolic Interactionism. So please do look that one up. As you start to work your way through the course, you could listen to them one by one. I would start with functionalism because it's the oldest, most traditional theory within sociology. I'd actually listen to them in that order. So start with functionalism, onto Marxism, feminism, and then have a listen to social interactionism. And then the final theory that you really need to get a grasp of is postmodernism. Now, if you think of the word post means after. Modernism, we talk about a modern world, a modern society, particularly after the Second World War. And so it's talking about a world which is highly adaptive, highly different from the previous world that we used to live in the 1950s and the 1960s. So postmodernism is the most contemporary kind of sociological research or sociological theory. And what postmodernism attempts to do is say why the other theories are outdated and not necessarily relevant compared to the world in which we live in. So if you think of the world that you are growing up in today, it's very different from your parents, and it's incredibly different from your grandparents and great-grandparents' generation. And so for postmodernists, they say it's really important to think of different theories and ideas and understandings of society, but putting a different hat on, putting a modern day hat on to try and understand the world in which we live in today. So again, I'm going to point you in a direction of another podcast. So once you've listened to the others, then do have a listen to An Introduction to Postmodern Theory. All of this is probably sounding quite in-depth and quite detailed at the moment. Lots of words to kind of get your head around. When students first hear things like functionalism and symbolic interactionism and postmodernism and conflict and consensus, it can all become a little bit difficult and a little bit confusing. But just break it down into little parts. So just have a think for yourself. Could you explain the difference between structuralism and social action theory? And could you explain the difference between a consensus theory and a conflict theory? If you can do that, that's a really, really good start. So get Googling, have a listen to some of the old episodes that I've put out there. And then if you are confused, then let me remind you to send me some questions. I'm going to do a Your Questions episode. In fact, I might do a few because quite a few of the questions are rolling in already. So if you are scratching your head, something doesn't make sense, you really don't understand a particular theory, then do message me. I'll give you that email address again. It's the Sociology Show podcast at gmail.com. I hope you are enjoying your start to new sociology courses. And as I said, anytime you get confused, anytime you don't understand anything, add me on Twitter, send me a message, ask me a question, or send me an email. All the very best of luck and keep enjoying your sociology.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.